Hello and welcome to today's episode. We have an amazing guest who has flown in from Ireland and talking about a beautiful place that she has created. Her name is Ciara Fingleton, and she has created this happy place, a place where you can go and find calm, peace, serenity, and just embrace nature in a really beautiful way. But she's also embraced the Irish culture of the area that she's in and created a glamping place. And I know glamping might not sound that glamorous, but it's not just about glamping. So we don't talk about glamping as such, but we talk about the benefits of when you go somewhere and embrace no technology, and nature that's around you and connecting with other humans who are also in this place. So it's just, she shares some really beautiful stories. She shares about how one can celebrate Halloween, which in Ireland is actually Samhain, and just the storytelling of, the Irish culture. So it is spoken with an English accent. So you're not going to get that beautiful Irish accent. But the thing is, you get these beautiful stories and you will find and hear about a beautiful gem in Ireland. But sit back, listen, grab a cuppa, and just enjoy this conversation.
But as always, before we dive into the conversation, very quick reminder, please hit subscribe, hit follow wherever you are listening, wherever you're tuning in. We would appreciate you supporting us and following us and liking and sharing. The more people do that, the more people we get to listen to these wonderful conversation and learning from our wonderful guests. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for all the support. And now let's dive into this really lovely conversation with Ciara. Hi, Kyra. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to you.
Me too. It's been a while. So we've met in person. We've met at a conference a couple of years ago, and I kind of been following your journey. And you do something that is very close to my heart, something I'm very excited to learn more about. But also, I'm just curious, and I'm sure our listeners are curious as well. Who are you? What do you do? And I always add a little caveat to this question is it's not necessarily like the CV bio of this is my elevator pitch, but it's the reason behind what made you to kind of get onto this path. What was it that really inspired you, and what were the catalysts for you to do what you do right now, to be who you are right now, um, compared to, maybe what was the previous life or previous career?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I suppose I started my career as such in advertising and PR, and that was kind of, I did communication at college and studied, with a view to becoming either a journalist or a PR person or advertising exec. And I managed to get a job in PR and then moved over into copywriting and was working in London for a time. And while it was brilliant, it was great fun, I met a lot of great people. I never really felt comfortable in that environment, and I think the corporate element wasn't for me. So I took a year off. I was made redundant out of a job that I had worked really hard to get, and I went traveling around Australia, which was just the most fantastic year. And I met my now husband on that trip, which was a bonus. But he's a lovely Irish man and he's from the Midlands of Ireland. And I knew very little about Ireland before I met him. And he just told me there's no way that I'm moving to London. He'd spent a couple of years there and he said, look, it's just the city is not for me. I'm a country boy and my family is into farming and this is my home. And if you want to share my life, then you'll have to come and give it a go. So that's how I ended up here in County Laois in the Midlands of Ireland. And initially, I started working in copywriting as a freelancer. And then when we had kids, it was becoming more and more difficult to do that kind of ad hoc work. And together we decided to set up a glamping site. So we actually now have two glamping sites in an area which is not known for tourism really. So it was kind of a experiment, a bit of a suck it and see situation. Would people actually come to stay with us? We started 10 years ago now, and we started very small on a real shoestring budget. We set up three bell tents and a little um, kitchen and bathrooms, and started from there and have built it up year on year. We had wood cabins added, and then we built a Hobbit Village 5 years ago. So there's 6 little grass-roofed houses, and that went really well. And we've just got some grant funding and are building 3 luxurious self-catering themed houses on the original Glamp site. So the tents are gone. We've upgraded again. We've taken a big leap. Every 5 years or so, we take a big leap with our business. But it's meant that I've had time to bring up my children. They've grown up with the business. And although I am kind of busy with the business, but they've kind of grown up around it. And as opposed to commuting into Dublin and having that city life or the corporate life. So it's been tough, but it's been worth it. So worth it.
I love this story. And, I think the freedom and the flexibility that's what I love about being in business. The fact that I can control my time. And if I need to prioritize, I want to prioritize, being outdoors for you, spending time with kids. Yes, building a business is hard work, but I think the freedom and flexibility to organize your own schedule, it really is a huge benefit to many people. But something that really caught my eye from when we were kind of brainstorming or looking at this possible interview, what would be the topics that we could talk about. And I love that you said kind of from corporate redundancy to wildly happy times, like pivoting to wildly happy life. I would love for you to tell me a little bit more about like how did you come up with, obviously the phrase wildly happy, what does it mean to you? What is the definition for you of wildly happy? I'm always curious to see how people define happiness and how do they chose that right here, right now, how I live is my happy.
Yeah, I mean, Wildly Happy Times is our tagline for our business. And we spent a lot of time thinking about what it would be and how to convey why people come and stay with us. And we do get different groups of people come and stay. So we have a lot of families with kind of school-age children, but we also get a lot of groups of women will come for hen parties and birthday parties. And more recently, we've had people coming for kind of wellness retreats, and we've actually got a couple of creative retreats booked. And what we were hearing a lot of the time was that people wanted to get away from modern life and kind of back to, for the families, it was often like the parents were like, oh yeah, this is kind of just like what my childhood was like. There's no Wi-Fi on the site, right? So that's number one. There's no TV, there's no Wi-Fi, no devices. So you kind of switch off when you come and you're really making that connection. I mean, the site is beautifully landscaped. We've acres and acres of wildflower meadow with a little pathway woven through for people to explore and connect with, the birds and butterflies and just immerse themselves in nature, but also to connect with each other, which is kind of becoming a lost art in modern life. And I think especially with kids, there's a constant distraction, there's always something 24/7, there's something on a screen somewhere. And it's really interesting to see how people kind of unfold into that. And you can hear their laughter, you can hear them talking to each other. Sometimes they'll bring instruments and be playing music around the campfire, or they'll stay up late and be looking up at the stars because we're very lucky. There's very little light pollution here. We're surrounded by farmland, basically. So there's a fantastic view of the stars, which you just don't get even in a small town. So I think a lot of the wildly happy times, it comes from seeing people make that shift. And it's a shift that I feel myself, when I go into the glamping site or go for a walk in some of the beautiful areas near us. We're coming down with forests and waterfalls and beautiful bogland. Ireland's a beautiful country, but we're very lucky to have a very quiet, unspoilt part of it, and just, really calms the nervous system, but also helps you to connect with yourself and with those dearest to you.
I really wish I had known about this place before we left the UK and came back to South Africa, especially when you mentioned the little hobbit houses and all that. And as you said, walking through the meadows and the forest, waterfalls and pathways. It's just like, oh wow, it sounds like a really beautiful place to connect. And like you said, with families coming with children of school age and not having their devices glued to their hands and having to reconnect with with others. And when you mention, instruments, I used to be part of Toastmasters in the UK, and the crack. Whenever we went to Ireland on conferences, we had the crack, which is, for those who don't know, it's basically just, my experience was, majority of the Irish people who were part of Toastmasters would sing, would play an instrument, would read poetry. It for me, it was just about fun and almost going back to the arts in a way, because like I said, somebody would just read their own poetry or another poem, or just somebody would pick up a guitar or a ukulele or something, start playing it, and people would just jump in and start singing. And when you mention instruments, I'm almost having this vision of guests sitting around a fire and just enjoying themselves, as you said, singing, playing an instrument. And when somebody sits and plays an instrument or starts singing or sharing a story and or poetry or something, you just want to sit and listen and absorb that. So I'm really loving this area that you've got, and I'm sure Lenka's going to get in a van and come and visit you at some point. But it just sounds like such an amazing place to just reconnect with others, because I'm sure your guests start to communicate with each other and start talking to other families or other people that are there, because you're not glued to that device that's in your hand. So you're not like looking down, and you relaxing and you enjoying nature, that you just want to be more friendly, want to communicate with others. And if some of the fireplaces are communal, then you sit with others and you really enjoy it. So with all that rambling, is what have you seen from your guests over the years, having gone from your few bell tents to your hobbit house to your log cabins? Is what have you experienced as a human, this development, but also the experience of connecting with your guests and seeing people most probably arriving harassed and then leaving relaxed and almost having reconnected with nature? So just love to hear some of the stories you've seen or some of the experiences you've noticed through people just reconnecting with nature and not being consumed by electronic devices.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that is the crux of it, really. And as you say, the site is very communal. There's two separate sites, but they each have a communal kitchen where people will, make food, but they end up chatting. The parents or the adults will chat. And there's, in the Hobbit Village in particular, there's a central green where it's the Hobbit houses face in towards it. So the kids, somebody will come out and start kicking a ball around, and by the end of the evening, everybody's playing the match. Everybody's on a different team and they're all playing some kind of ball game together, and they never met before. I mean, we've seen families meet, make friends on the site, and book the same dates the following year to reconnect with the family that they met here the year before. And that's a beautiful thing to facilitate. It's something that I hadn't foreseen, that people would actually meet and make friends, and they make it kind of an annual trip now to meet up with the friends that they made here. I mean, we've been doing this 10 years, and I'm actually getting goosebumps talking about it, because it's fantastic to have provided this place where this can happen. But other things that I've noticed, particularly kids who come down from the city, if they're living in a real concreted area, Ireland is very lush and green, but if you're living right in the city or its environs, then perhaps kids don't get as much time outside. I think screens are part of that shift as well. That, people are worried about kids' safety, the roads are very busy in the city, and it's much easier and much, you think, safer to hand them a screen, have them at home, keep them quiet, rather than let them play outside. But there were some kids sitting on a picnic blanket on the grass, just having their picnic lunch. And one of them jumped up in surprise because they'd seen creatures in the grass, and they were so shocked to see that there were insects and worms the grass was a whole living ecosystem, and it had never occurred to them. They'd never, this kid of 8 or 9 had never seen that. And I thought that's kind of sad, really, that they hadn't had this opportunity to see, nature in action just on a daily basis. I think that a lot of modern life is very sanitized, and that we're trying to protect our kids and do the best for them, but sometimes they're missing something in that happening. But again, you're talking about people connecting with each other and seeing a shift from when they arrive to when they leave. I actually have a recent example from some guests who've just left. And they were an older cohort of guests. We tend to have mainly families, but this was a family, but they booked because it was their mother's 70th birthday, or had recently been. And when the people arrived, they were trying to surprise the mum. So they asked me, could they arrive a little bit early? So I said, well, yeah, okay, fine. You'll get ready to greet mum. And the first lady got out of the car, and she was actually shaking. And she said, oh, we've had a terrible time. It's kind of a birthday, but we lost our father 2 months ago. My mother's been in hospital with a terminal illness, and we had to defer the birthday celebration until now, when she was well enough to come with us. And there was another member of the family who'd been sick, and they were all suffering in their various ways. They'd obviously been through a lot. And I could see, I nearly wanted to gather this woman up and hug her, because she was so kind of shaken up by everything they'd been through. And she said, we just want to get away and make some memories. And I thought, you poor woman, anyway, but she'd come to the right place, because we've had fantastic weather, and they just kind of settled into the place. They were completely enchanted when they came around the corner to see the Hobbit Village. They were blown away by how pretty it is. And then they were really impressed with how kind of comfortable it was, because glamping can mean a lot of things, but they were relieved that they wouldn't be roughing it. They had the ensuite bathroom, and it was going to be okay. And then they kind of just settled in, and they just set up little, fold up chairs, and just sat out in the sunshine, and they just laughed and, chatted to each other and had a few drinks, and they just completely unwound. And then after they left, they sent me all these photographs of themselves together sitting at the campfire, and they were just saying thank you so much for letting us have this time to connect, because they didn't know how long the mother had. And I thought, I found it really moving, that they had chosen our place, and it really is that kind of bucket list, which is a real honor, because we're a very small business, and it's again a sort of unforeseen situation that somebody would choose us for that reason. But I was just so delighted that it worked out for them, and that they enjoyed the time that they spent here.
Just shows how powerful nature can be, and just being in a place that's not dominated with TVs or phones, but where nature is the dominant entertainment, so to speak, and it's the power that nature can just help us to heal, help us to settle and relax. And they chose right, by the sounds of it. And thank you for sharing that, because I think families can get very disjointed or very disconnected through, hardships when something happens, through distance, through life just happening. And having a place to come and reconnect, or just rest, or just have fun and sit around a campfire on your fold-up chairs and enjoy the family and make the memories. As I said, they wanted to come for memories. So it really shows how powerful just something simple can be. And it doesn't have to be hardships. Like you said, you've got ensuite bathrooms, and it's not about roughing it. It's just about going back to simplicity and slow, and the enjoyment of what something can, or how nature can teach you, and the story of the kids realizing that nature's right there. It's in the grass. You look at the grass, and there's worms, there's ants, there's bugs, there's flies buzzing, there's mosquitoes, there's butterflies, there's beetles, there's all sorts going on around you. And when you live in a city, you don't really get to really appreciate that. So thank you so much for sharing those stories and just showing us how powerful just taking a step back and finding a place like what you've created to just, slow down, breathe, catch up with yourself, and just enjoy it. And one thing you said, you're bringing up kids, and I know you in the beginning you said that you're busy running the business, but this must be such a wonderful experience for your kids to be living, meeting people, first of all, with the guests coming, but also out there in nature, playing outdoors and just seeing almost how life should be without all the concrete and buildings and corporate jobs and all the shoulding that we are told or grown up with. Is how have you, seeing your kids growing up, and you've most probably had a little bit of that experience growing up as well, in your childhood, how's that, and comparing other kids, just generalizing, have you noticed a difference with your kids to sort of other kids because they have this almost unique experience?
Well, I suppose that's maybe one that you should ask the kids, what their view is. I think, like with everything, there's pros and cons. I think overall they're extremely lucky, as we all are, to live in this beautiful place. And, I just fell on my feet because I happened to marry a farmer's son, basically. Um, so, yeah, I just ended up here, sort of washed up here, really. But the kids have gone through phases of, loving it and maybe resenting it a little bit because it does take up a lot of time. And the upside is living in this beautiful space. And I've my youngest daughter, who's now 11, she was only a year and a half when we started. She's grown up with it, and it has worked out well for her, I think, because she's very into flowers and nature, and she loves going on the walks and all that kind of stuff. So she definitely would say, I think, that she loved it. And she's very good now to meet the kids that come, because she'd often have kids her own age. And she's got pen pals that have come to stay, and they've sort of said, oh, I'll send you a postcard and we'll keep in touch, which is really cute. And then my older daughter's really into horse riding. So she's very fortunate because we've got space to keep a couple of horses, and my husband's really into horses as well. So, and it's a lovely addition because we've a Connemara pony among them, and guests love to see the Irish horses, and they've got a lovely temperament. They're really friendly. So she's got space to ride a horse, keep a horse, which is a huge bonus that she definitely would not have if we were living on a housing estate somewhere. And then for my son, he's a bit more kind of a little bit introverted, let's say. Now, when he was younger, he would go and play with the kids, and definitely he loved building the campfire and toasting the marshmallows. But I think as you get into your teenage years and older, then maybe living in the countryside becomes maybe more of an imposition, because you kind of want to connect with people in a different way in that phase of your life. So you're kind of moving on to maybe trying to hang around with other teens. And our guests tend to be younger. So for the two girls, they've definitely made friends. They've definitely got loads out of it. And my son has had, I'd say when he was younger, he probably enjoyed it more. Whereas now he's being recruited to help with jobs around the place. So he's mowing the grass, and he's, helping with the recycling and that kind of stuff. So he might say it was more of a pain than a pro, but he has had good times out of it. In fact, we had in the Halloween period, we always used to get this storyteller called a Shanachie, is what they call them in Ireland. It's a guy who's sort of the custodian of Irish stories and music, and exactly what you described with the crack. And we'd host a sort of night over the Halloween holiday, which they call here Samhain, which is kind of the Irish origins of Halloween, this Samhain celebration. And he would come and celebrate Samhain with us, and guests would come, but all the kids would come and sit around the fire and hear these amazing stories. And he'd be great to get them involved in the singing and the music. And he even did some stargazing, and he had kind of a laser pointer to point out the constellations and stuff. So those kind of activities, definitely they've all benefited from that. But sometimes living in the countryside can be hard as well. I think so.
Well, farmer's girl over here. I grew up in a very rural part of Czech Republic on a farm, so I can speak as an adult of this experience of being raised on a farm as an only child, where we did not have the kids and friends and people coming around. There was just the work. But the teenage years were the only difficult part where you are far away from the parties. I felt like I did not connected really with my school peers because I always had to just leave the school quickly, jump on a bus and go home and work, and getting anywhere to parties or any kind of a shopping required my parents to drive me, and they were busy at the farm. So the teenage years tend to be a bit more difficult when you really want your independence, you want to hang out with your peers. But ultimately, I'm so grateful for this upbringing. I'm so grateful for the connection that I have with nature and with growing your own produce and with it, whatever it is, be the horses, be it the nature. One thing that comes up a lot to me right now, especially traveling around UK, it's people are coming back and trying to relearn a lot of the nature. And there's so many foraging courses. People go and learn and they feel so proud to understand that, nettles are good for this and that these herbs are good for this. And they're so happy and proud. I'm like, well, that's what I grew up knowing from my family and from my childhood and from just running around in the fields. You end up knowing these things. And every time I'm out and about, I know which herbs and which fruits and which berries and which mushrooms I can pick up all year round wherever I am to kind of bring in. And I love free stuff. Is it something that you're noticing as well with obviously your family, your kiddos, but also the people coming in? Is there this interest in, or is it just here in the UK that people are so into foraging and really practically reconnecting with the nature rather than, oh, we're just going to hang out in a forest and have a good time, to then be more committed to learn how we can use nature to truly heal us and to fuel us, not just emotionally and mentally and spiritually, but physically in our body with all the herbs and remedies and roots and fruits that the nature has plentiful.
Yeah, I do see that here. I think people coming to our site are probably more used to staying in hotels, honestly, and they're kind of dipping their toes in the water. They're kind of thinking, well, straight camping would be too much to have to, put the tent up and bring all the gear, and we're just not really able for that. We just want to try a couple of days and see, do we like being outside, getting the campfire and sort of getting the children the experience of camping without actually having to camp. So that's more often our target market rather than the more sort of niche hardcore of people who would be into the foraging. I mean, I definitely think that it's getting popular here as well. And I know there's a lady locally who does foraging tours that, we'll obviously mention it to our guests and send people over to her. Um, and she does all the growing and handmade soaps and all that kind of stuff as well. And we're very fortunate to have my parents-in-law are both, my father-in-law is a brilliant grower of things, and he'd be very into kind of organic and all that kind of stuff. And so he would definitely have passed on some knowledge about, as you say, nettle soup and all that kind of stuff. And my mother-in-law's a brilliant cook, and she would, she could make amazing jam and out of forage berries. So we grow raspberries and black currants, and we have apple trees and quite a lot of stuff that we just kind of take for granted because it's always here. Blackberries in the sort of autumn time. And my husband is into sloe gin, so he would go out and be picking the prickly sloe berries, which actually, if you bite into them, they're so strongly tannin flavored that you would think they're inedible. But actually, if you steep them in gin and mix them up with a bit of sugar, they're pretty good. I'm not sure the kids would be able to taste that, but they certainly help picking the berries. So yeah, they have been immersed in that, and it's something that we kind of almost take for granted because it's, as you say, we're steeped in it and surrounded by it.
It is very much almost a skill that a lot of Western civilization has lost through living in cities and growing up in cities. And it's simple things like knowing where milk comes from or where meat comes from. It doesn't come off a shelf. It doesn't come out of a plastic bottle or a glass bottle or packaging. It actually comes from an animal. you need to actually milk it. And I was fortunate enough, is I grew up in a city here in South Africa, but we had a lot of friends who had farms, and often on school holidays, I would be plonked in a car and off to farms, and really got to milk a cow by hand because they didn't want to have machines, and to have that milk come out of the cow and drink that fresh. I mean, you don't get fresher than that. And being able to go out into the garden and pick the vegetables that you're going to eat that evening, and it's really something special, and I've really appreciated. And this is something that one of the reasons we're back in South Africa is to start creating something that we are back living in nature, utilizing nature. And I've got to learn some of the plants that can be picked and can't be picked. But the thing is I'm noticing a trend more and more through adults, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, who are wanting to have that experience and go back to that slow way of living, that way of understanding what you can eat from nature. You can pass a hedgerow and you can make a salad from the hedgerow. But if you don't know, then you get worried. But I'm thinking, and I'm noticing, and I know Lenka's noticing as well, is more and more people are wanting this experience, are wanting to go out, are wanting to create communities within nature that have that slower pace, that does eat the good food that's grown nicely, organically. Make your own jams, make your own soaps. It doesn't mean you got to make everything, but if you have a community around you, like you said, somebody in your area who makes their own soaps, and somebody else will make jams. But it's almost getting back to the simpler way of life. And it doesn't have to be the harder way of life. It's just more gentle way, and really embracing nature. So I really love what you creating here. And I know that you've created something for those who don't want to be lugging tents and everything. The thought of camping for me is just like, no, but glamping, I can do glamping, because it's out in nature without the hassle of putting up a tent and sleeping on a blow-up mattress that most probably goes out flat halfway through the night, and there's a beautiful stone right there underneath the tent, or all these. I've done the camping, so it's what you're creating is almost that gentle step into getting into nature and embracing not necessarily the farm life, but experiencing the farm life, is seeing the animals, seeing the horses, seeing what is there, and chickens, if there's chickens, and being able to pick the berries because it's there, it's right there, and tasting them. I mean, if you taste something that's grown properly to something you bought in the local supermarket, there's a massive difference. I mean, tomatoes grown in a garden organically, and you taste them. I mean, you can almost taste the sunshine and the flavor. But you go to a supermarket and it's like no taste. It's tasteless. And having that experience and having that opportunity to come to a place like yours, really embrace that, enjoy it. It can almost trigger something within one, an idea or a thought, or like, okay, I want to make changes. I want to do something differently, even if it's going to the farmer's market on a Saturday and getting your vegetables there instead of the supermarket. A place like yours is almost that stepping stone from civilization, I'm saying that loosely, city life, to I'm wanting something more in nature, but I'm not quite ready to just fly right in and do it all, but have that stepping stone to say, okay, this might be something that we can really start to think about, to develop, to see if it's something we want to be doing more and more often. And one of the things you said is you create retreats for people to actually come and experience. And I know Lenka is all on, conferences or retreats being smaller, not as big as the one she was recently on, and I think you were there as well. Is these smaller events that are more out in nature, more gentle, more slow, and not sitting in a hotel room being blasted by aircon from 8 till 5, looking at screens and being talked at and just having full on. Have you noticed that people are embracing that idea more and coming hopefully in droves to you and booking out the events and to really experience a more communicative type of event and a more gentle event where people actually leave more stimulated than, shell shocked and feel so drained when they've done, because it's just been such a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And we've had recent examples actually. We've got 3 retreats have been booked in a short space of time. So one is kind of a corporate retreat. It's a group of kind of educators who are interested in sustainability, and they approached us to say, could they hold their kind of business retreat or their latest, I guess, briefing or update between themselves. But they said they always go away and they were so sick of staying in bog standard hotels. And this was completely the antithesis of what they were trying to promote and what they're trying to discuss. And they said they'd love to immerse themselves into, the kind of sustainable nature that they're trying to encourage in other places. And it just made sense. And they were like, oh, we want you to give a surprise, blah, blah, blah. But it was kind of clear that they'd more or less decided they were going to book the stay. I mean, obviously we had to negotiate a little bit, but that's business. But yeah, they did say those words, we do not want to be in an indoor hotel, closed in with the aircon, blasted with the screens. We want to settle into nature and for this to spark ideas in the context that makes sense for us. So, it's a real honor to be hosting that kind of a retreat, and we're really looking forward to it. And as part of that, now they will be obviously providing the content for that. But they have asked, I recently qualified this year as a yoga teacher, and I've been teaching locally. And it was kind of a personal thing, but also I thought, oh, maybe there's a space for this within my business and that these two could go hand in hand. And it actually has brought the two things together because they were like, oh, well, there's another place we're looking at, but what kind of activities can we do at your place? I said, well, I'll throw the yoga in and, we could have a kind of yoga session, bit of meditation and, out in nature. And they were like, oh, yeah, okay, that kind of, tipped it over the balance. So that's one element that has come into play as well, which is really nice. And then the other 2 retreats are being held by 2 creative ladies. One of them makes earrings and jewelry from kind of natural materials and beautiful colors. And the other is kind of she does fabrics but it's all kind of floral and based on botanical type designs, really beautiful stuff. And they've come together and they've done kind of day retreats or evenings, but they've never done a full weekend. And they were kind of a little bit trepidatious about booking, or, a whole weekend. Are we going to be able to fill this? Anyway, they booked one out within 24 hours, and they had so many applicants for this retreat that they've actually booked a second one a month later. So, there obviously is an appetite for, first of all, retreats as a whole, also the nature. And they had like shared some footage of our site, and I think that helped them to sell it because they knew they'd be staying in a beautiful place, but also the creativity was a big part of it. So nature and people kind of reconnecting with that creativity and playfulness, which I think again is another thing that's quite often lost in modern life. So those are kind of recent examples of retreats, and I'd love to do more because they're the kind of thing that really would light me up, and I'd love to go on one of them. They're fully booked, unfortunately. But yeah, so that kind of stuff is great to be able to host that, and it's just another way to use the site.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait to come and experience and be immersed. Like Ireland is on my bucket list, on my van life bucket list. So fingers crossed, putting it out in the universe that next year we are heading over in the summer to Ireland. And if I'm there, I would love to just come by and see your place and see what events you have up going on. One last question I have is you mentioned for the Halloween you had a bit more of a local storyteller. Is it something that you do more often around the year, different seasons that I can imagine that, and one of the reasons why I'm so intrigued to go to Ireland, it's there is magic in the land, there is magic in the people, there is magic in the history. There's so much of the like the Celtic kind of an ancient wisdom that maybe doesn't fully translate over in the Europe or in UK, that there's something so very special in the culture and the history that is still reasonably preserved in Ireland. So is it something that obviously your husband is Irish and he will have some connections in there. Is it something that you kind of encourage and try to bring in as well, kind of make sure that you are part of building and maintaining and preserving and spreading the kind of the magic of like Irish heritage?
Yeah, I suppose as an English woman originally, I've lived here for over 20 years now, but I do feel quite conscious that I'm representing Ireland and specifically Laois, because I tend to be kind of a spokesperson for my area quite a bit in tourism context anyway. But I'm seeing it with fresh eyes as an outsider, and I just think it's the most beautiful, magical place. Obviously, I've chosen to live here, but it's historically it hasn't been a tourist area, and it hasn't been very much picked up nationally as most people have never heard of Laois unless they've got a reason, they've got a connection here, a family member or something like that. But I just think I hate the phrase hidden gem, but it is that. So I'm trying to get the word out. But in terms of stories, yeah, we love to have the storyteller, and we also have a guy who comes to play music regularly, and he's very popular. Everybody loves to hear the songs and sing the songs. But with our new accommodations that we've recently launched, we've three, and they're all kind of themed around the Midlands area. One of them is themed around stories, one around nature, and one around the Abbeyleix Bog, which is this beautiful kind of landscape. And there's a whole history around how the bog, the turf, used to be cut and burnt, and now people are moving more to preservation and the biodiversity. So we've kind of themed the three accommodations around these themes. But the sort of biggest of the three is the Shanna Keys house, which is the storyteller's house. And we've got a local artist came and she's painted this magnificent tree up the stairs, and it kind of goes onto the ceiling and over. It's a double height space, so you kind of, as you walk up the stairs, it's kind of nearly like you're climbing the tree. And there's this whole story about the money tree, which is a story from Laois, about how people used to put coins into a tree and make their wishes. And then I've asked her, above every light switch, there's a little kind of about the size of your palm of your hand, a little image that connects to one of the Irish legends. So there's a salmon, a leaping salmon, and that's connected to a story about the salmon of knowledge, which is a really famous Irish story. And then there's one about a white horse that carries a famous warrior across a sea to a land where you never age, and there's a whole legend about that. And then upstairs, there's a story about the children of Lear, where the king's children are turned into swans. So we have a swan above the light switch there. So each room has its own story and theme. And the idea is to link it back then to have the full story on our website, that you can find out more that way. And it's just kind of a talking point for visitors to connect in with that Irish heritage.
Wow, I definitely want to come back to Europe and just to come and visit. And
you've got an excuse now.
Yes. But it's just something that I experienced. I used to, as I think I've mentioned earlier, I've been to Ireland a few times, and it is such a beautiful country. And even just putting your feet on the ground has something so special about it. And I've read a lot of stories on Ireland, sort of the history, but also the the mythical bits and the spiritual side, and there's such a connection, and the Celtic and even the old language, Gaelic, that I know it is a dying language, but I think the Irish are trying to bring that back, and it just sounds like what you're creating is so magic and so inspirational, and just a beautiful place for people to come to, that it's not going to be hidden for much longer, I don't think, but it's embracing the culture that you are now living in. Like you said, you've been there now over 20 years, growing up in England, but now living in Ireland, but actually embracing the Irish heritage and the Irishness, because there's something so unique about Ireland. It is not, you can't compare it to anything else, because Ireland has this own magic. And I know that I used to spend a lot of time with Irish. I had an ex-Irish boyfriend, but I've also, through Toastmasters, met a lot of Irish, and there's just something so unique about them that you can almost spot them a mile away because of just something different, something special. And I love how you're bringing that into what you are creating. And even though Leash is in the Midlands and in the middle, and is not yet the destination, because it's not you just driving through or passing through. But the thing is just having that space and that possibility of going there, and these retreats that you are creating, and the space. And as you said, playfulness and creativity people are craving those, and you're providing it. And it just shows how much it's almost wanted, because these two women created something, or I don't know if we can book it, and within 24 hours fully booked, and having to do another one. It just shows how powerful and important this place is that you have created. So thank you so much for really sharing this with us, and showing us that there is another gem in Ireland that is most probably not on the tourist path yet, but is getting there by the sounds of it. And it's one of these treasures that when you find it, it's like, wow, it's like that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. You must be the little leprechaun that's got this pot of gold there. And you've got it there, and you are sharing it and spreading the word. And I think that that's so powerful, this place that you've created. So thank you so much for sharing it with us. And yes, I've got to put this on my bucket list of a reason to come back to Europe for even nothing else, a little holiday. So thank you so much for that. But before we finish off, this is what we call the gold nugget. Kira, may we please have your gold nugget?
Okay. I would say, I suppose, if I had a gold nugget, it would be to try and take time to appreciate in the moment what's around you, and to take time in nature, blue and green spaces, by water, by rivers, by trees, and green places, and just to take time to appreciate the good things. I often am reminded of this. I think it was a meme I saw online, actually, and they sound very trite. It's easy to kind of spin them out, but it was something like, if you think about your life today and think about what you wanted maybe 20 years ago when you were younger, and think, it's in the human mindset to always strive for more and always look for new challenges, and that's fine. But sometimes it's good to look back and say, once upon a time, all I really wanted was to meet a nice partner, to have a nice home, and to have some kids, and a purpose and a job that I enjoyed.
That is very powerful. And I think that is something I love the idea of looking back, seeing maybe what you've wanted 20 years ago, and are you in that place now? and obviously things change, but it is, having that connection, having that home, having the job or the purpose. Are you striving for it? Are you finding it? So thank you so much for that really beautiful gold nugget. And this is why we love our gold nuggets, because even though they are often, repeated in some ways, but it's always different. There's always a different perspective. And I think that as humans, we can never hear beautiful gold nuggets or advice too many times, because we need to have it repeated over and over so it actually settles in. So thank you so much for that. Now, for our listeners who are listening and thinking, you know what, I've got to go to this place, I've got to find out more, I want to have a retreat, or find out what retreats are happening, or just finding out about where Leash is, or what's all about Leash, or anything about your space, or just connecting with you, where can people find you?
Yeah, well, our website is glampingunderthestars.ie, and we're on Instagram. I think it's just glamping under stars is least is the Instagram. We're on TikTok and Facebook, so lots of ways to find us.
And obviously, all the links will be down below in the description, so people can click the link and go and find you wherever they want, and they can look what events you have coming up, and what kind of types of accommodation do you have, and organize a little trip for themselves, their business, their friends, their families, and visit you in your lovely little Irish area. So thank you so much for being here today. I loved learning more about you and your journey and your experiences. But here on the podcast, I'm always trying to squeeze in a little bit more, kind of bring in another perspective to try to add in another question. Because the mission for us here is to explore different ways of living happier, healthier, more fulfilling lives. And you're definitely building that and creating that for yourself and creating that for your guests. And I'm always curious, like right here, right now, you said you have a new site opening, there's lots of business going on. But on top of that, what is it that gives you life right now?
Wow, that's a big question. Yeah, I think it's constantly learning. I think that is, uh, before I started a business, I had no idea what was involved. And that was probably a good thing, because I would have been overwhelmed and probably would have been put off if I'd known how much of a commitment it was going to be, and how hard it was going to be sometimes, and how much hard work would be involved. Because we've put a huge, each time we do something new, there's a whole new learning curve. And even now we're launching a completely different kind of accommodation, and we're probably appealing to different guests. And it's the summer holidays, and I'm trying to keep my kids occupied. And my son is going into his exam year in September. So, life is always changing, but I think that's good for us. And the yoga teacher training that I did has given me a new perspective. And it was great to go back and learn something completely new and not connected with business or kids, and just for me, just to learn something completely new. So I think if I was going to encourage somebody, I would say, always be learning, always be open to learning, and try and connect in with something that lights you up, because it does make a difference, and it has a knock-on effect to everyone around you then. I mean, the yoga philosophy is very much about that, and kind of coming from a place of calm, but being able to kind of observe. And I think it's helped a lot in business to have the yoga, which is really strange. But yeah, I would definitely say keep learning and do yoga.
I love that. And yeah, I'm with you with the yoga. It is really a wonderful way to just be in the moment, especially when you're doing a tree pose and you're trying not to fall. You have to focus so that you don't fall. So thank you so much for that. And learning, Lenka and I are big ones on learning new things. So that reminder is, it is wonderful to learn, and you don't have to do book learning. You can learn just by being out in nature and seeing how different things, but it's being open to learning something. So thank you so much for that reminder, and for sharing your story with us today, and for being with us, and just sharing your passion and helping our listeners to realize that there is this beautiful gem in Ireland, to go and find it, and reminding myself and our listeners that nature is really powerful, and just embracing nature and really allowing ourselves to go back in. So thank you so much, and for sharing your energy with us today. We really appreciate it.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
For our listeners, what have you got from today? Are you ready to pack that car and shoot off to this beautiful area? I know that I'm, want to book an air ticket and go and visit. And I know that Lenka has most probably just added that to her list of where she wants to travel next year. But we would love to hear your thoughts on being back in a place that embraces culture, that embraces its heritage of where it is, but also creating a space that you can really enjoy nature. So if you're not in Ireland, or it's not possible for you to go to such a place as what Kira has created, where do you go to just get that connection to nature? Where do you go to find that space and that calm? And if you haven't found it yet, look at Ireland. There might be somewhere there for you. So do share in the comments your experiences. And if you are now planning a trip to Ireland, we would love to know. But until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.